네, 그러면 천천히 시작을 해보도록 하겠습니다. 지금 다들 귀에 저희 동식 통역 기기를 꽂으셨을 텐데요. 그러면은 이제 외국 분들은 한국어로, 한국 분들은 이제 영어로 아마 통역이 진행이 되고 있을 겁니다. 인사를 먼저 드리자면 저는 국립현대미술관 교육문학과의 이슬기라고 합니다. 오늘 와주신 여러분 대단히 감사합니다. 저희 전시를 말하다 교육 프로그램 안톤 비도클 그리고 김수환 교수님과의 대담을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 사전에 안내 말씀을 좀 먼저 드리자면 지금 끼고 계신 동시통역 기기는 이제 여러분들의 원활한 이해를 위해서 저희가 준비를 하였고요. 나가실 때 반납을 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 그리고 또 한 가지 좀 양해 말씀 그리고 요청 사항을 좀 말씀을 드리자면 휴대폰은 가급적이면 무음이나 진동으로 변경을 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 그러면은 제가 말을 길게 하기보다는 저희 강의자 선생님들께 마이크를 좀 넘겨드려야 할 텐데요. 저희 큰 박수로 환영의 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 저희 안톤 비도클 선생님부터 이제 좀 시작을 하도록 할 텐데요. 그 전에 지금 오신 분들 착석하시면은 한번 시작을 해보도록 하겠습니다.
Hello, everybody. Very nice to be here, and thank you so much for coming. It's in the middle of the day on Thursday, so it's really quite unusual to have so many people. I want to thank MMCA for acquiring the work, for making this exhibition and bringing me here. It's really quite an honor to do this. And also, I want to acknowledge that the exhibition was initiated by the previous director of the institution, Bartomeu Mari. And also, I would like to thank very much Sujong Kim for actually organizing the show and working for quite a long time with me to make it possible. As well as the head of the curatorial team too, Jade, as well worked on the exhibition. So I would like to start maybe by correcting a mistake that I've been trying to correct it for months now. It's just something that appeared in the press release somehow, and also in some other brochures for the show. And today it was reproduced in one of the bigger newspapers. And it's a small thing, but it's a very, very significant matter. So in this newspaper article and in some of the exhibition brochures, it says that Kosmism, Russian Kosmism, was banned or made illegal by the Soviet government in 1917. That is not correct. In fact, it's the opposite. Kosmism was encouraged, supported, embraced, as were very many different manifestations of radical art, radical philosophy, radical science. The first decade after the revolution was absolutely remarkable and kind of unprecedented, because historically it's maybe the only time, not maybe, it's definitely the only time in the history of art and culture where radical artists did not view themselves in an antagonistic position with the government, but actually collaborated and completely subordinated their work to the project of revolution, of creating a new society, of transforming life in the USSR and producing a new kind of a citizen through art, through science, through philosophy, through writing, through literature, through by any means possible. And in this way, it's actually quite similar to the central sentiment that kind of undergirds the entire project of Russian Kosmism, which is a slightly different goal, let's say. It is not only to produce a communist society, but it is aimed to produce a new society on this planet, a society of immortal human beings, resurrected human beings, in a way that perhaps fulfills certain horizon of communist thought, yeah? So it's quite important to acknowledge that after the revolution, until approximately late 1920s, Kosmism and many, many other aspects of avant-garde culture, experimental culture, were actually not only tolerated but supported. And that included things like even new religions were supported by the Soviet government. For example, one of the really, really interesting figures within Kosmism. His name is Alexander Svetogor. He was an anarchist, a Ukrainian anarchist, but also a futurist poet, an editor, an incredible organizer. In 1922, he started a new religion. Yeah, he basically created a new church of free labor. This is what it was called, roughly translated from Russian. And the goal of this new religion was to kind of try to articulate a new kind of spirituality which was not opposed to this emerging socialist and communist society, but would somehow help it come into being, yeah? So traditionally, it's always seen as religion as like the opposite of socialist thought, the opposite of communist thought. But actually, there were experiments where new religions were developed to enhance, to help, to aid Marxism and communism. The government actually gave them a building in Moscow, and for a number of years they held all sorts of religious meetings, but it was a kind of a strange atheistic religion. Yeah, it was a religion without God, but a religion like a kind of a humanist, atheist religion, even though it sounds completely paradoxical, but the object that was venerated in this church was actually humanity. And they completely rewrote Christian liturgy and basically all of the sort of meetings of the congregation of this church, which were largely artists and writers and activists, yeah. What transpired is after the liturgy, there would be kind of political discussions of the current problems of that time, of those days, and also readings of futurist poetry. Yeah, so it was kind of a pretty incredible project that went on until approximately 1926, 1927, when things started changing politically, the climate started closing down, and in the end, unfortunately, all of these people that belonged to this church of free labor ended up either executed or in prison. But for a while, there was quite a long period where all of this kind of radical, inventive activity was not only tolerated, but actually actively supported, financed, given space, given resources, and so forth. So I just wanted to make like a really strong emphasis on this, because I think a lot of times, you know, people sort of, there is this presumption that communist countries are very intolerant to certain forms of culture, and often it is true, but it is not always true. And the kind of first decade of the Soviet Union is an unbelievably important example of an exception. So today, I'm not going to make a formal or historical or theoretical talk, because Soo-Hwan Kim very kindly agreed to participate in this event, and he's a really incredible academic and researcher and writer. So I will leave to him to present the historical narrative of Russian Kosmism, to contextualize it, theorize it, and then we will have a discussion. But maybe I will use the remainder of my time to speak a little bit specifically about the films that are in this exhibition. The films are basically a trilogy that I've been working on for almost a little bit more than 6 years now. And all of them were shot in and around various parts of the former Soviet Union. So obviously in Russia, but also in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in certain parts of Siberia, which is Russia, but let's say this region is called Altai, which ethnically is not Russian and joined the Russian Empire fairly late in the game. It's kind of quite close to Mongolia, but this particular region was quite important to Fedorov and other Russian Kosmism for various reasons having to do with spirituality and religion, and also kind of the ancient history of Skiffs and sort of prehistory of Slavic people and many other things. So I thought that since probably not everybody has seen the exhibition already, I will show just little excerpts from all of the 3 films, and then just talk a little bit about how they were made and yeah, and all of that. это космос. Мы здесь, чтобы снять фильм о невидимой энергии, бессмертии и воскрешении всех людей, когда-либо живших на Земле.
Вот простая идея. Объединенные усилия всего человечества должны быть направлены к одной цели – победа над смертью, бессмертие, воскресение всех, кто когда-либо жил.
Я хочу вам кое-что рассказать. Моя мать родилась в том же городе, что и человек, улетевший в космос из своей комнаты. Ее отец был художником и боевым пилотом, убитым в военном сражении в Китае, совсем юным. Этот фильм посвящен ему. Кадры, которые вы видите, сняты на Волге. Мне все нравится в этом месте, хотя я никогда здесь не был и ничего не знаю о нем. Okay, we can turn the lights back on. So this was the first film in a trilogy, and perhaps the most complicated one to make. This is because actually there is nothing to film. Yeah, Cosmism existed as an active kind of intellectual movement for a period of approximately 60 years, let's say starting roughly sometime in the 1870s, and more or less ending in a certain way, although let's say I will discuss that, whether it really ended later, around early 1930s when it was suppressed by Stalin. It starts as a kind of a very eccentric idea by a very modest figure, Nikolai Fedorov, who was a librarian, and a school teacher. He was a son of a kind of illegitimate child of an aristocratic father. So he basically was given relatively good education. He attended university, but he did not inherit any money or property. And in the beginning, he supported himself by teaching in children's schools, like kind of early childhood schools. And eventually, he got a position as a librarian in a kind of index card department of the one of the most important libraries in Russia, which is located at the center of Moscow near Kremlin, which at a certain point started as a private collection of yet another aristocrat, another prince, and then was given to the city of Moscow as a public resource. And he never taught, he never published during his life. Part of it was maybe a certain kind of modesty, but also perhaps he realized that his ideas were so fantastical and maybe quite transgressive in their relationship to the dominant religion of Russia at that time, which was Orthodox Christianity. So he was paradoxically both a devoutly religious person and at the same time somebody that completely reinvents Christianity to accommodate his vision of humanity and his philosophy and his imagination of the future, which he called the common task. I know that these days this school of thought is referred to as Russian Cosmism, but the title Russian Cosmism is a very late kind of invention. It first appears in 1970s in the Soviet Union in the Encyclopedia of Soviet Philosophy, I believe in the 1972 edition, for the first time combines the word cosmism with the word Russian and coins this term, which is a little bit problematic and rather unfortunate because it positions it as a kind of a nationalist thing, as something belonging to a particular country, nation, ethnicity, where in fact it's a completely universalist philosophy that is intended for everybody on this planet and beyond this planet. Yeah, the scope of his thinking is completely universal, not only meaning different countries, but other species, other planets, other galaxies, and so forth. The philosophy itself seems to be deceptively simple. It's just based on a kind of a very basic principle that one can describe in one sentence, that maybe evolutionary speaking, we haven't reached our full potential because we're mortal, because we die. Yes, Fedorov did not view death as a natural necessity, and he felt that this is something that needs to be overcome by human capacity for technology, for science, art, and all other kind of ways in which we could affect the world and ourselves. So he felt that we shouldn't wait for God to resurrect us, but that we should use our own quite unique abilities of thinking, of being able to create things, to remake our bodies, to improve our design, to make ourselves stronger, immortal, and then he felt that we also owe a certain kind of a debt or an obligation to everybody who came before us, because they gave us life, yeah? So we can't just become immortal ourselves, let's say people in this room, but we also need to bring back to life those who gave us life, our parents. They would need to do it for their parents, so grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on to the very, very beginning of humanity. Yeah, some of the other cosmists expanded this desire or this basically right to be alive to the totality of living beings on this planet and beyond, including animals and plants, and there is even some kind of I've come across mentions of kind of resurrecting microbes and viruses. Yeah, so basically, cosmists felt that everything that was alive has a right to be resurrected and to live forever, to exist forever. So it's a kind of an incredibly massive project, and Fedorov understood the enormity of it. So this is where the political and social aspect of it comes in. He felt that capitalism is simply not efficient enough to enable a project of that scale, that the way the resources of this planet are distributed in a capitalist system will never produce the kind of resources that will be necessary to achieve such a larger-than-life project, or let's say larger-than-death project, yeah? So he felt that the society needs to be reorganized along the lines that sound very much like socialism and communism, yeah? So there would be no private property in order to achieve this universal project of immortality. There would be no consumption and production of luxury goods. Everything will be shared in a very egalitarian way. Human relations will change, you know, and I think Su Juan will talk about this in more detail, but this kind of the project of immortality and resurrection would require radical reconstruction of human society from the kind of organization that we know now and that also existed in the 19th century. He also realized that perhaps this planet is not big enough to support such enormous population of resurrected people and animals and beings. Yeah, there would be simply way too many of us for this planet to support. So he advocated research of space travel, development of technologies for spaceships, for rockets, for exploration of other planets, and also there are quite interesting descriptions of this kind of a desire maybe to modify our body, to maybe enable it to live without oxygen, to be much stronger, to exist in the condition of the kind of temperatures that of cosmos, which are very, very low, very cold temperatures. He also explored some ideas about self-feeding, or what's called autotrophy, or kind of teaching the body to generate energy for living without consumption of other living things. For example, there are certain kinds of planktons on this planet that derive energy directly from the sun through a form of photosynthesis. Yeah? So they do not need to consume anything or kill anything in order to be alive. So even though the idea seems quite simple and is not new, I mean, just about any religion, maybe except for Buddhism, let's say, but let's say definitely Christianity, in certain way Islam, you know, the notion of resurrection, immortality, eternal life is as old as human culture and civilization. It's as old as, you know, our death, yeah? I think even probably the very first human beings perhaps fantasizes about not dying, yeah? So it's by no means a new idea. But his kind of systematic mapping of kind of transformation of society, transformation of science, transformation of technology and art is really quite amazing, yeah, and inspired. And so even though he never published or taught, somehow his ideas started circulating quite widely, particularly after his death. But even when he was alive, it's quite interesting. For example, Lev Tolstoy, who is a very famous Russian novelist that you probably know, who was also a philosopher and also had a lot of kind of interesting ideas about society and politics and all of that. But he used to visit Fedorov at this library almost every month, where they would engage in this kind of long conversations, and he was completely fascinated with Fedorov's ideas and his way of thinking. Also, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who is again incredibly shaping, you know, voice not only in Russia but I think worldwide in a certain way, was also quite affected by Fedorov, and they did engage in a correspondence. What Dostoevsky wanted to know is if Fedorov meant immortality literally, not the immortality of the soul, not immortality in another world, in a transcendental realm, but immortality in the flesh, materially in this world. So he wrote a letter to Fedorov to ask him what he means. And Fedorov replied, but unfortunately by the time the reply reached Dostoevsky, he already died. Yeah? So somehow, ironically, he never got the answer because of his own death. But after the revolution, ideas of cosmism became even more attractive for a number of reasons. For one thing, cosmism, as much as it is rooted in a kind of maybe Christian tradition, this whole notion of, you know, resurrection, immortality, all of that, but it is a deeply materialistic way of thinking, yeah? It recognizes the world as a kind of, and the universe as a material space. And that is kind of very compatible or very kind of sympathetic to the kind of materialism that Marxism is, yeah, as a materialist philosophy. But also, you know, if it's important to try to imagine what it must have felt like to live through the Russian Revolution, through the October Revolution, when the world's order suddenly turns completely upside down, where things taken for granted for millennia, such as private property and all of that, suddenly become illegal, you know? So where the entire kind of power structure flips in a way that's never really happened before. I think it opened up a kind of maybe it suspended a certain kind of disbelief for a lot of people, and it probably made you feel that, well, if that kind of a revolution is possible, yeah, then anything is possible. Maybe immortality is possible, space travel is possible, resurrection could be possible. Yeah, because so I think we live in a very different time. You know, our political imaginary, our maybe philosophical imaginary, and you know, unfortunately, I would have to say even artistic imaginary is much more limited. Yeah, we're much more maybe cynical at this point and all of that. But I think you know, for the people in Russia in 1917, 1918, as much as it was terribly violent and an incredibly cruel time, it was also, it must have been something incredible just by way of imagining the full spectrum of possibilities for transformation, for development, progress, and so forth. So from this point of view, of course, all of these ideas became really popular and affected many people in the art circles, of course, artists, painters, sculptors, filmmakers, scientists, doctors, political leaders, you know. In fact, it's actually quite difficult to find a significant figure from that who was active during this period, who was not in some way influenced by Cosmism, or whose work or writing or diaries do not reflect some kind of relationship to it, which is completely amazing considering that all of these ideas come from a philosopher or a person that was never even called himself a philosopher, never left his library, never published, never taught, yeah, but somehow it managed to really disseminate and circulate very widely in society. So speaking about Cosmism, there are different, for me, there are different paradigms in it. There is a kind of a religious, spiritual, mystical dimension. There is also an artistic dimension, and this could all be separate lectures, separate talks. I mean, one could talk about Malevich from the position of, from the point of view of Cosmism, and of course, for example, his most famous painting, The Black Square, which has been analyzed ad infinitum in art history, but like I've never come across a very basic fact that this is a painting of zero gravity because there is no up, there is no down, there is, you know, it's pure levitation, yeah, as is most of suprematism. So Eisenstein was completely fascinated by Cosmism, and actually his unfinished book about the theory of cinematography reflects a lot of Cosmist ideas. But even somebody like, apparently, Leo Trotsky also came in contact with Cosmism. There is a very important writer within this kind of constellation of people, Valerian Muravyov, who was a socialist revolutionary. He participated in the first revolution, and then after October Revolution, he was immediately arrested in St. Petersburg, and because all of this, they were called esaires. I don't know how you translate that. A certain kind of socialists, which were not communists, yeah. So most of them were arrested and were supposed to be shot, yeah. And somehow Trotsky intervened. He went to visit Muravyov in jail, and apparently they spent the whole night in some kind of very deep conversation. And then immediately he was released the next day and appointed a researcher at the Ministry of Labor, where he proceeded to write a completely fantastical treatise on mastery of time, which seems to be something about labor organization deceptively, but when you start reading it, it's a completely fantastic, like, bizarre text about literally understanding how to control time by being able to bring back the past, by being able to resurrect the past. So basically, this period, let's say between 1917 and the late 1920s, is a really prolific period within the development of Cosmism, and that most of, you know, significant people in the Soviet Union of that time in some way are either affected by it or contribute to it through their research and through their work. So, and many of them, of course, were scientists, yeah. So the second film in the trilogy is based on the life and work of and ideas of Alexander Chizhevsky, who was called at the time the Leonardo da Vinci of the Soviet Union because he was so multifaceted and multi-talented. He was a scientist. His education was actually in history and Egyptology, or study of ancient Egyptian culture and language. But he was also a biophysicist and a poet. Yeah, he was friends with Mayakovsky. He was also a painter, a rather interesting painter. In the 1920s, he published a really interesting study, which was actually his PhD dissertation, which is a study of the effects of solar radiation on human history. And what he proposed in the study is that the periodical cycles of the sun and increases and decreases in its activity, yeah, and its volatility, have a kind of a psychological effect on human beings, yeah. And because sun is one of the oldest objects that have been studied in almost every culture, and recorded, observed, and actually this is something that survived from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe to China. Almost every culture kept astrological records of the activity of the sun. So there is actually quite a lot of information about the celestial object for many centuries, yeah? So he tried to kind of do a statistical analysis and try to correlate this historical information about the life of the sun with the life on Earth, with human life on Earth, with the political, economic, military developments. And he basically observed that there is a correlation, yeah, that there is a statistical correlation between cycles of the sun and development and activity of humans, and which could result in revolutions, wars, epidemics, booms and busts on stock market, and all sorts of. There is one of the fantastic charts in this book is a kind of a correlation between solar activity and British politics and elections in British Parliament. Yeah, so the book was really kind of became quite a celebrated object, and he was invited to lecture at Columbia University. The rumors are that he was nominated for a Nobel Prize, but the Soviet government reacted very negatively to this book because they basically, to them, it implied that the communist revolution was created or was made not by the struggle of the proletariat, but by some star in cosmos, which is an apolitical object, yeah? So for them, his study was completely heretical, and so he was arrested and sent to prison and then to a labor camp and then lived in exile for many decades, and basically was only able, he survived, but he did not get a permission to return to Moscow until the very end of his life in 1960s, yeah? So I'll show you a short clip from this film.
Мы находимся в Караганде, чтобы установить аэроионоаспираторий, электрическую люстру, способную выделять отрицательно заряженные ионы. Она соответствует конструкции, которую разработал один советский ученый, который поклонялся Солнцу. Он находился в Караганде очень много лет, сначала как заключенный исправительно-трудового лагеря, начальство которого позволило ему совершать свои научные опыты по ночам в тюремной камере. Затем в лагере при угольной шахте, где он открыл помещение с аэроионификацией для продления жизни заключенных, тюремный санаторий, камера для восстановления здоровья.
Okay, we can have the lights back on. And then very briefly, because I already went over my time, my half an hour, the third film in this trilogy is directly based on a really important essay by Nikolai Fyodorov, which is called Museum, Its Meaning and Mission. For Fyodorov, museum was maybe the most important institution in human society because he felt that unlike everything else in our society, which is always kind of dedicated to the production of the new, museum is the only institution that actually preserves and takes care of the old, of the memory of history and so forth. So in a world where everything is continuously being destroyed by where the past is kind of erased by the present and the present is erased by the future, and you know, the iPhone 10 replaces iPhone 9, and this kind of relentless cycle of consumption and replacement and obsolescence, and you know, museum seems to be the only place where things that don't have a kind of a useful function anymore, for example, I don't know, broken sculptures, are not discarded but are actually preserved, yeah? So he felt that because museum already developed this kind of quite sophisticated preservation, conservation, restoration techniques, logically it should be radicalized not only to preserve objects and stuff, but actually to preserve life and restore life, resurrect life. So he felt that the museums would actually be the site for resurrection when immortality and resurrection will become technologically possible. And he also saw this process of immortalization and resurrection as a work of art, yeah? And I think it was basically quite, he's not a very theoretical philosopher, yeah? I think a lot of his intuitions are very kind of spontaneous, and I think a lot of it came simply from going to museums in the 19th century, which contained mainly sculptures and paintings, portraits of people who are no longer alive, and perhaps he felt that, okay, well, here we preserve the likeness of somebody, but what if we actually try to preserve their life or return their life? Or, for example, in the Museum of Zoology, you have in Moscow incredible taxidermic stuffed animals. You know, they're kind of a little bit unusual because they're all placed in very active positions. Yeah, they're all kind of like jumping at you. So it's very easy to imagine going there that maybe the next step is to actually bring them back to life, not only preserve them as this inanimate object. So I will just show a very, very short snippet from that film. How do I get out of here? Oh, and I just want to warn you, there is a bit of flashing light in the beginning, but it shouldn't cause anybody a stroke, yeah? Not every kind of strobe light causes epilepsy, just some.
Музей есть последний остаток культа предков. Уничтожить музей нельзя. Как тень он сопровождает жизнь. Как могила стоит за всем живущим. Всякий человек носит в себе музей. Носит его даже против собственного желания. Как мертвый придаток. Как труп. Как угрызение совести.
Okay, so in just the very last, like, 2-second thing that I want to say that in all of these three films, besides the actual narrative and images and all of that, I also tried to do something that's maybe a little bit unusual, because so much of Cosmism is not, it's closer to activism than it is to more of, let's say, analytical philosophy or like kind of like contemplation. Yeah, it's very much because it is about death and immortality. Almost all of the practitioners and theorists and writers of cosmism tried to do something that would actually cure people. Yeah, a lot of them were actually doctors. Like, interestingly enough, Alexander Bogdanov was a doctor by education. So, so there is a kind of a desire in cosmism for some kind of immediate action to prolong life, to basically prolong life. So I tried, I was thinking that, you know, cinema at the end of the day, you know, it is color, sound, and light, you know, and all of these three elements have been used in various medicines, sometimes alternative medicine, sometimes quite mainstream. So in the first film, I use red screens because in the 90s, NASA scientists, the American space program, discovered that red light in a certain range heals wounds very rapidly. They needed to find something for people at zero gravity, for cosmonauts in orbit, because at zero gravity, a paper cut, any kind of cut of your skin could take a very long time to heal. So they needed to figure out how to cure them faster, and somehow stumbled on the effect of this color red and red light. In the second film, I used clinical hypnosis, which is a technique used by many hypnotists but also doctors to cure addictions to nicotine, to alcoholism, to gambling, and all sorts of destructive habits. And in the last film, this flashing, it turns out that a few years ago at MIT, research scientists discovered that this kind of flicker can help patients with Alzheimer's disease. It can somehow stimulate your memory, yeah? So all of these films are intended not only as something to transmit information or for some kind of a psychological, emotional impact, but also a little bit to affect you on a level, on a physical level, on material level of your body, yeah? Some kind of a radiation of the audience. So I think I should stop here, and thank you.
Great.
네, 저희 안톤 비도클 작가에 이어서 이제 교수님께서 짧게 대담을 해주실 예정인데요. 김수환 교수님은 이제 우리나라에서 러시아 문학을 연구하고 계신 연구자이기도 하십니다. 최근에 러시아 우주론에 관한 글을 기고하기도 하셨어요. 그래서 관련해서 김수환 교수님의 말씀을 좀 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
저는 조금 이렇게 배경 설명이라 할까요? 그런 부분들을 좀 말씀드리고자 합니다. 일단 그 1917년 볼셰비키 정부가 들어선 이후에 러시안 코스미즘을 금지시켰다, 이런 그 잘못된 정보가 나갔어요. 기사로도 어저께 그 경향신문인가요? 잘못된 기사가 나가서 굉장히 크리티컬한 문제입니다. 처음에 말씀하셨듯이 실상은 그 반대죠. 사실은 그 30년대에 스탈린이 집권하기 전까지 이 러시안 코스미즘 사상과 당시 공산주의 정부가 부딪히지 않았을 뿐만 아니라 대략 1920년대 중반경에는 코스미즘의 영향을 받지 않은 어떤 작가라던가 뭐 사상가, 예술가, 뭐 영화 감독, 화가, 뭐 이런 사람을 찾는 게 거의 불가능할 정도로 전방위적으로 광범위하게 영향을 끼쳤던 사상입니다. 그런 사실들이, 역사적 사실들이 점점 더 많이 최근 들어서 밝혀지고 있습니다. 오늘 저는 몇 가지 그 러시아 코스미즘과 관련된 배경적 사실을 말씀드리면서 동시에 왜 100년 전에 있었던 이 좀 신기한, 엉뚱한 이런 기이한 사상이 오늘날 우리 시대에 어떤 그 contemporary actuality, 그러니까 동시대적인 유효성을 가질 수 있을 것인가에 관련된 이야기를 조금 드리려고 합니다. 이 보리스 그로이스라는 사람이 2015년에 모스크바에 있는 그 가라즈라는 현대 미술관이 있거든요. 그 미술관하고 이제 같이 이 루스키 코스미즘이라고 하는데 일종의 앤솔러지 선집입니다. 그래서 피오도로프를 비롯해서 지금 아까 안톤이 언급해준 여러 명의 그런 그 소위 얘기하는 우주론자들, 코스미스트들의 직접 쓴 글들을 모은 이 책을 발간하게 됩니다. 이 책으로 인해서 이제 그 러시아 우주론이라는 이 담론이 아주 새롭게 지식장에 이제 재등장을 하게 되는데요. 이 러시아 선집이 나온 이후에 곧바로 이제 영어본 번역 프로젝트가 추진이 됐고 지난 2018년에 드디어 이제 MIT 출판부에서 이제 이플럭스 저널하고 이제 콜라보를 해서 이 러시안 코스미즘이라는 영어본 선집이 출간이 됩니다. 이 영어본 선집이 출간이 되자 이 워소라는 영국의 이제 그 유명한 뭐 좌파 출판사죠. 이 워소에서 이제 그 출간 이벤트를 이렇게 클레어 비숍을 사회를 시켜가지고 출간 이벤트를 하고 그거를 스트리밍 생중계를 했어요. 이것만 봐도 지금 이 러시아 코스미즘이라는 게 지금 이제 최근 서구 이제 뉴욕과 베를린을 중심으로 한 아트 씬에서 가지는 위상을 능히 짐작할 수 있습니다. 2017년에 이제 베를린의 그 세계문화의 전당이라는 곳에서 굉장히 크게 코스미즘 특집 컨퍼런스를 열게 됩니다. 전시도 하게 되고 이게 이제 그 최근 몇 년간 이제 불어왔던 이 코스미즘 열풍의 어떤 결정판 정도 되는 컨퍼런스였고요. 히토 슈타이어가 대담하는 장면입니다. 이 컨퍼런스가 끝나고 나서 이 플럭스 저널에서 이제 러시안 코스미즘 특집호를 발간하게 됩니다. 그때 이제 Art Without Death라는 이런 그 타이틀로 지금 3부작 우리 MMC에서 하듯이 그 전시를 컨퍼런스와 동시에 진행하기도 했습니다. 이게 이제 그 이플럭스 88호죠. 2018년 2월 달에 나온 코스미즘 특집호 이플럭스 저널입니다. 뭐 이 밖에도 굉장히 많습니다. 지금 이 러시안 코스미즘 리비지티드 뭐 재방문이라고 부를 만한 그런 현상이 전 세계적으로 지금 뭐 불어오고 있는데요. 문제는 이제 왜 지금 하필이면 이 오래전 100년 전 사상이 왜 이렇게 재등장하는가? 도대체 당대의 우리들에게 어떤 인사이트를 주고 있는가 하는 질문이겠죠. 중요한 거는. 자, 그래서 저도 이제 좀 흉내를 내봤습니다. I was imitating you. The red light. 빨간색으로다가 준비를 해봤는데 피오도로프죠. 굉장히 그 뭐랄까요, 그 아주 소심한 reserved 해야 되나? 그러니까 reserved person. 생전에 그 자기 글을 한 번도 출간한 적이 없고 그냥 도서관 사서로 일하면서 이렇게 정례적으로 이렇게 세미나 같은 걸 열었어요. 거기 아까 위도클이 말했듯이 도스토옙스키, 톨스토이가 이제 정기적으로 그 세미나에 참석을 했고, 아까 영향을 받은 몇몇 작가들을 말씀을 하셨는데 사실은 이제 한국에는 그렇게 많이 알려져 있지 않지만 굉장히 중요한 소비에트 작가 중에 안드레이 플라토노프라는 작가가 있습니다. 이 안드레이 플라토노프 같은 경우는 실제로 그의 작품 속에서 이 러시안 코스미즘 사상을 자기 나름대로 녹여내서 굉장히 독특한 소설들을 썼죠. 지금 아까 위도클이 언급을 안 했던 중요한 코스미즘 사상가 중에 한 명이 이 tsiolkovsky라는 사람이 있습니다. 이분은 사실 과학자들, 특히 이제 그 로켓 과학자들한테는 거의 뭐 아인슈타인급입니다. 그러니까 이제 뾰도로프의 뭐 수제자 정도 될까요? 그러니까 뾰도로프 사상에 아주 큰 감화를 받고 실제로 뾰도로프 사상에 따르면 모든 선조들이 다 부활을 할 것이고 그렇게 되면 이 지구가 모자르니까 당연히 그 선조들을 우주에 이주를 시켜야만 할 것이고 그렇다면 우주로 나가기 위한 로켓이 필요할 것이다. 그래서 실제로 최초로 그 대기권을 진입할 수 있는 로켓, 그 3단 로켓을 디자인하고 실제로 우리가 이제 유리 가가린이 우주에 가기까지 그 이른바 소비에트 우주 과학을 사실상 디자인한 인물입니다. 실제로 로켓 과학의 아버지로 불리고 있는 사람이고요. 그러니까 판타지가 먼저 있고 판타지 이념이 먼저 있고 그 이념을 실제로 실현시켜야 되기 때문에 과학을 거기에 적용시킨 사례입니다. 그리고 이 tsiolkovsky는 실제로 자기가 SF 소설들을 몇 개 쓰기도 했습니다. 레닌의 동료이자 적수로 알려져 있는 알렉산드르 바그다노프라는 사람이 있죠. 지금 여기 보시면 안쪽에 고리끼가 있고 레닌과 지금 이제 체스를 두고 있는 장면입니다. 이 바그다노프는 뭐 레닌과의 논쟁 그리고 또 뭐 한국의 번역본도 나와 있는데 붉은 별이라는 그 SF 소설을 쓴 작가기도 하고 근데 이제 아까 비도클이 말씀하셨듯이 본인이 의사였거든요. 이 분도 뾰도로프의 코스미즘 사상에 굉장히 큰 영향을 받아서 수혈 연구소라는 걸 만듭니다. 실제로 피를 그 연구소에서 200여 차례 그 실험을 해서 젊은 사람의 피를 늙은 사람한테 수혈을 해서 건강을 회복시키고 심지어는 회춘을 하도록 만드는 실험을 했고 실제로 본인이 희귀병에 걸린 제자의 피를 수혈을 하다가 그걸로 인해 사망하게 됩니다. 우리가한테 잘 알려져 있지 않은 바그다노프의 일화이기도 하고요. 네, 여기 이제 마지막 가가린에 이르기까지 그 러시아 코스미즘에 이제 계보가 되는 사람들을 쭉 써놓은 그림인데요. 제가 그 조금 강조하고 싶은 내용이 하나 있는데요. 이 스비에타 고르라고 아까 비도클이 언급했던 사람인데 이 사람은 심지어 바이오코스미스트 그러니까 생우주론이라 할까요? 생명우주론을 신봉하고 그것을 추종하는 당을 만든 사람입니다. 실제로 그런 폴리티컬 파티를 만들어서 그 아나키스트 코스미즘 운동을 벌였던 사람이고요. 그다음에 무라비오프라는 사람은 아까 이제 그 잠깐 이야기했는데 시간과의 투쟁 그러니까 시간을 우리가 지금 뭐 시간을 잘 조직해서 써라라는 그런 매니지먼트 정도의 개념이 아니라 실제로 시간을 정복해서 과거를 현재로 이렇게 오게끔 만드는 그런 그 테크놀로지를 개발하겠다고 그런 그 인스티튜트를 만들어서 실제로 활동을 했던 사람이에요. 이 시간성과 관련해서 제가 조금 흥미로운 포인트 하나를 좀 말씀드리고 싶은데 이 러시안 코스미즘이 갖고 있는 아주 독특한 정의, 저스티스 혹은 평등, 그 이퀄리티에 대한 그 관점이 있습니다. 이게 뭐냐면 뾰도로프가 생각했을 때 이른바 사회주의, 이 소셜리스트 저스티스라는 개념이 굉장히 치명적인 문제가 있다는 거예요. 어떤 문제냐면 이 사회주의 유토피아를 건설하기 위해서 과거 세대가 온갖 괴로움을 겪으면서 헌신하고 결국 죽었는데 그 노력의 그 결과물, 그 열매를 오로지 현재 세대하고 미래 세대만 누린다 이거죠. 이건 페어하지 않다. 그러니까 정의가 아니다. 다르게 얘기하면 현재가 혹은 미래가 과거를 착취하고 있다. 현재와 미래를 위해서 과거가 희생돼야 되고 현재가 과거를 차별하는 구조다. 이렇게 생각한 거예요. 그렇다면 진짜 정의가 수립되려면 어떻게 되느냐? 방법은 딱 하나밖에 없죠. 그 유토피아적인 미래를 위해서 헌신했던 모든 과거의 선조들을 다 살려내서 그 과거의 사람들도 이 유토피아의 결실을 누리도록 만드는 것. 그거밖에 없습니다. 그렇기 때문에 실제로 그래야 된다고 생각했던 거고요. 근데 여기서 재미있는 것은 과거의 선조들을 하나도 남김없이 다 살려내야 된다는 거예요. 그러니까 이제 제가 읽을 때마다 항상 웃음 짓게 되는 그런 내용이 있는데 그 이 첫 번째 시리즈 This is Cosmos에도 잠깐 그 내용이 언급이 됩니다. 뾰도로프가 살았던 당시에 지금의 카자흐스탄하고 키르기스탄 있는 그쪽 그 지역에 아담의 시신, 그러니까 아담의 아스타타 아담 그게 이제 발견됐다 그런 얘기가 있었어요. 그래서 뾰도로프가 그 영국의 그 이제 탐사대하고 러시아의 탐사대가 같이 거길 가서 그 아담의 그 시신을 찾아와야 된다. 그걸 크렘린으로 가져와야 된다. 그렇게 주장을 했어요. 그 아담의 시신으로부터, 그러니까 그 시신의 흔적으로부터 아담을 부활시키면 이제 어쨌든 인류의 선조니까 그 아담부터 시작해서 전부 다 살릴 수 있는 거죠. 그러니까 immortality for all 했을 때 그 all이라는 것이 이 정도로 원칙적인 입장입니다. 그러니까 우리가 기독교의 영생 개념과 비교해 보시면 이것이 갖고 있는 그 레디칼을 바로 느낄 수 있는데요. 자기가 생전에 뭐 좋은 일을 했다거나 아니면 뭐 하느님의 뜻에 맞게 살았으면 부활이 되고 이런 게 아닙니다. 무차별적으로 무조건 다 살려야 됩니다. 불멸의 기본소득이랄까요? 네. 뭐 어떻게 네가 얼마나 했느냐, 너는 어떤 자격이 있느냐 그런 거 아닙니다. 그냥 다 그 최근에 어벤져스 영화에서 그 타노스라는 그 빌런이 이렇게 핑거 스텝을 하지 않습니까? 핑거 스텝을 하면은 전 우주의 half가 그냥 싹 없어지는데 그 타노스도 무차별적으로 했죠. 뭐 누구 뭐 영웅이니까 안 죽고 그런 거 없습니다. 그냥 한꺼번에 싹 다. 그래서 이 뭐랄까요? 그 굉장히 그 오컬트 독트린에다가 뭐 무신론에다가 마르크스주의도 있고 뭐 이런 온갖 것이 뒤섞인 굉장히 희한한 어떤 사상입니다. 그렇지만 이런 말씀을 듣고 이거 과거를 구제하는데 이거 뭐 베냐민 리뎀션 개념 아니야? 이렇게 생각하시는 분도 분명히 계시리라고 봅니다. 혹은 이 전 인류를 넘어서 전 우주에 대한 어떤 아주 스페시픽한 그런 책임감 이런 것으로부터 소위 얘기하는 뭐 엔트로포스인 인류세 담론 이런 것을 떠올리실 분도 있을 것 같아요. 근데 이제 지금 제가 말씀드렸듯이 이 책임감이라는 거는 좀 특이한 책임감입니다. 그러니까 인간이 자연, 동물, 그다음에 이 지구, 더 나아가서 우주, 기후 이런 것에 대해서 책임감을 가져야 된다. 즉 공간적인 축에서 책임감을 가져야 된다라는 것에 머무는 게 아니라 지금 이 우주론은 시간적인 축에 대해서 책임감을 가지라고 이야기를 하고 있어요. 즉 과거와 현재와 미래로 이어지는 이 시간 축에 대해서 이 템포럴리티에 대한 어떤 특이한 종류의 책임감을 말하고 있습니다. 굉장히 허무맹랑하면서도 어처구니 없으면서도 그 레디컬함에 한 번 더 생각을 해보게 만드는 측면이 있습니다. 무엇보다 강조하고 싶은 것은 이 허무맹랑함이라는 것이 지금 우리 당대에 갖고 있는 어떤 특별한 의미 같은 겁니다. 즉 뭐냐면 우리 시대는 미래를 이야기하는 온갖 종류의 그런 뭐 SF적인 상상력으로 넘쳐나고 있지만 사실상 믿고 싶은 혹은 믿을 만한 어떤 미래의 청사진은 정말 보이지 않습니다. 소위 얘기하는 기획, 즉 프로젝트로서의 퓨처라는 것은 거의 씨가 마른 것처럼 보입니다. 관련해서 그 미래에 대한 유토피아적인 상상력도 고갈되어 있는 것처럼 보입니다. 언젠가 프레드릭 제임슨이 유토피아의 정치학이라는 글에서 그런 얘기를 했던 것으로 기억합니다. 유토피아의 기능 중에 하나는 우리가 살고 싶은 미래, 꿈꾸고 싶은 미래를 보여주는 것뿐만 아니라 우리가 전혀 미래를 상상하지 못하고 있다는 사실. 그러니까 역사성이나 어떤 미래가 없는 비유토피아적인 현실 속에 옴짝달싹 못하고 갇혀 있다는 사실을 보여주는 것. 오히려 그 이데올로기적인 폐쇄성을 드러내는 것이 유토피아의 기능일 수 있다. 그런 얘기를 한 적이 있습니다. 그간 우리가 소위 얘기하는 카타스트로파, 파국적인 디스토피아적 비전을 너무 많이 봤습니다. 온갖 종류의 영화나 드라마나 소설들을 통해서. 러시안 코스미즘은 굉장히 간만에 등장한 어이없을 정도로 뻔뻔하고 대담한 유토피아적인 비전입니다. 유토피아적인 미래 비전입니다. 디스토피아적인 파국적인 안티유토피아적인 디스토피아적인 비전이 아닌 아주 뻔뻔하고 대담한 유토피아적인 서사입니다. 이걸 가지고 과연 우리가 무엇을 할 수 있을 것인가? 바로 그게 지금 우리 동시대에 이 100년 전 엉뚱한 사상이 던지는 가장 중요한 질문이 아닐까 생각합니다. 네, 감사합니다.
네, 김수환 교수님 말씀 감사합니다. 이제 다음은 두 분이 서로 좀 이야기를 나눠볼 시간을 가져보기로 할 텐데요. 사실은 이 러시아 우주론이라는 것이 저희들에게는 상당히 새롭게 다가오는 이론이자 담론이기도 합니다. 근데 이러한 주제에 대해서 두 분은 이미 여러 차례 이 전시 이전부터 좀 이야기를 나눠오시고 좀 공유해 온 바가 있으시다고 하는데요. 이것에 관해서 오늘 저희도 함께 좀 이야기를 들어볼 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다. 김수환 교수님께서 먼저 질의를 해주시면 이제 안톤 비도클 작가가 답변을 해주시도록 하겠습니다.
네, 제가 여기 지금 이거 앨런 머스크 사진을 띄워놨는데 미술계 종사자들이나 어쨌든 간에 좀 컨템포러리 아트 디스코스에 좀 친숙하신 분들은 코스미즘에 대해서 좀 들어보셨을 수도 있는데 그렇지 못한 일반 대중들이 일단 이 코스미즘의 아이디어를 듣고 가장 먼저 떠올릴 수 있는 것은 아무래도 소위 얘기하는 포스트 휴먼 담론일 거라고 생각합니다. 근데 이제 문제는 우리 시대의 이 포스트 휴머니즘 담론이라는 것이 점점 더 약간 억만장자들의 놀이터 같은 것으로 나타나고 있다는 사실인데요. 지금 좀 아까 보여드렸듯이 뭐 구글 기술이사 커스바일이라든가 유전자 복제 전문가 뭐 크레이그 벤터 같은 사람들 아니면 뭐 우주 개발 화성 식민지 전략에 있어서 지금 앨런 머스크보다 더 활발히 활동하는 액티비스트를 찾기가 어렵죠. 이런 상황에서 당연히 우리 시대에 보다 가까운 이 컨템포러리 현대의 이 코스미즘 불멸주의자들과 이 100년 전 이 러시안 코스미스트들은 어떤 점에서 어떻게 다른가 그런 궁금증이 생겨납니다. 말하자면 카피탈리스틱한 자본주의적인 코스미즘과 공산주의적 코스미즘이 차이가 있다면 그 차이는 뭐며 또 그 차이가 오늘날 그 포스트 휴먼 담론에게 어떤 시사점을 줄 수 있을까? What's the difference between capitalist and communist type of Cosmism and what insight they give us to the discourse of post-human?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, because I think this is like really one of the key points in terms of, you know, reception of Cosmism today, but also its development into the future. You know, because as fantastical as it sounds, there's been so many advances in biotechnology and, you know, discovery of genetics and I don't know, nanorobotics, artificial intelligence. So a lot of things that were quite fantastical 100 years ago, when, you know, most of people did not have a computer or anything. Yeah, they just kind of fantasized about technological possibilities. But now, actually, it's a different situation, and there is biotechnology to prolong life. For example, Peter Thiel, who is one of these kind of California oligarchs, let's say techno-oligarchs, yeah, he goes to a clinic in Los Angeles where he receives a blood transfusion placenta of blood of teenagers, yeah, because it's a kind of experimental technology that rejuvenates him apparently, not only physically but also apparently sort of creates like more mental agility, yeah. So it's a very expensive treatment. It's a bit dubious from the scientific or medical perspective, or at least there has not been enough experiments to confirm, in fact, that it is totally effective. But essentially, you know, 100 years ago, Alexander Bogdanov in Moscow was sort of kind of doing these blood transfusions in a very experimental way and accidentally killed himself trying to help one of his students who was sick with, I think, malaria. And then 100 years later, one of the richest men in the world is kind of like in a very vampiric way takes this blood of very young kids to keep himself young. So you could see sort of the difference. So there is a kind of a private longevity, private rejuvenation, private maybe even immortality, yeah, and then there is a kind of attempt to really make it available to everybody who is alive and even to the dead, yeah, because Bogdanov's plan was actually, besides this institute in Moscow, he was planning to develop blood banks throughout the Soviet Union, where all of the citizens of the Soviet Union could exchange blood for a number of reasons. One is for rejuvenation for old people, for a kind of a cure for certain diseases. He thought that immunity to diseases could potentially be transmitted through blood transfusions. So basically the old people would be rejuvenated, young people may become immune to dangerous diseases, and then everybody would achieve a kind of a literal brotherhood, yeah? Because there is this notion of brotherhood of the proletariat, so this brotherhood would become literal, and the whole country will become related to each other by blood, yeah, as a kind of one organism, which is also kind of a really strange, fantastical image of an entire population of 300 million of being kind of one entity, yeah. So I think the difference is really kind of radical in terms of like the capitalist imagination of immortality under conditions of private property, yeah, and a kind of a socialist or communism idea of immortality for all. And since at the moment it seems that the private version is actually moving forward, while socialism is somewhat on the retreat in the world. So I think this is potentially quite dangerous because, if this technology, if this biotechnology becomes available for the few, that means that who already own almost everything, yeah, that means that the rest of us will not only remain mortal, but it will be impossible to change this condition, and the kind of unfairness and oppression would continue for eternity because the owners of this planet will be immortal, yeah? So this is a kind of a very dangerous scenario, which I hope will not come to pass. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Can we change the image of Elon Musk, just not to give
Okay.
him
Okay.
more
Let's
additional
get rid of it.
publicity? That's much better. Let's go to...
How about
Oh
it?
yeah,
How about
Walter
it?
Benjamin,
Okay.
yes.
예, 지금 방금 말씀해 주셨듯이 바그다노프의 그 프로젝트는 정말 공공 블러드 뱅크를 만드는 거죠. 그러니까 모두가 다 함께 커먼리 유스할 수 있는 그런 혈액 은행을 만들어서 그걸로 다 모두가 다 피를 나누자. 어떻게 보면 좀 무섭기도 한데요. 네. 분명히 차이점이 있는 것 같습니다. 근데 제가 생각했을 때 가장 큰 차이점이라고 한다면 어쨌든 100년 전 이 코스미스트들은 현존하는 세계와 전혀 다른 새로운 종류의 다른 세계를 어떻게 하면 만들어낼 수 있을까? 그리고 그 세계의 새로운 룰과 윤리는 무엇일까? 이런 것들을 고민했던 것 같아요. 근데 지금 우리가 보고 있는 그 포스트 휴먼이 현존하는 세계를 더 프로피터블한 방식으로 연장하고 있는 것이 아닌가, 예. 그런 차이가 있는 것 같습니다. 과연 지금 우리가 쉽게 접하고 있는 그 포스트 휴먼과 관련된 온갖 테크놀로지컬한 이미지네이션이나 그런 인벤션들이 현존하는 세계를 완전히 다른 것으로 바꿀 수 있는 가능성을 뜻하는가, 혹은 현존하는 세계에 이미 프리베일링한 그런 어떤 질서와 법칙을 더 강고하게 연장시키는 방식인가 하는 질문을 던져보게 됩니다.
Maybe I would like to add to that. I mean, basically in post-humanism and transhumanism, there is this kind of a desire to leave humanity or humanism behind, yeah, to evolve technologically, scientifically, to kind of rebuild ourselves, maybe become partly, a machine of a kind, or disembodied intelligence that could exist in a computer drive or something like that, yeah. But at the same time, it's to shed human morality, human ethics, which are really perceived as a kind of a burden. And of course, in the background of it, there is the critique of humanism, yeah, which is not a universal thing, or in a way, yeah, it's the subject of humanism historically tended to be white male subject, yeah. But I think what it is really incredibly interesting how, let's say, Cosmists approached this in the Soviet Union and just before the Soviet Union, where there is this desire for active evolution and transformation and some kind of a further development of human potential without completely abandoning the human subject, yeah, somehow recuperating certain kind of ethical positions, certain kind of something which, without which it's very frightening, yeah, without which it opens up a door to some kind of like techno-fascism or something along these lines. What do you think about this, Juan?
네, 테크노 파시즘이라는 표현을 쓰셨는데 실제로 제가 아까 마지막에 말씀드렸던 러시안 코스미즘이 던지고 있는 오늘날에 던지고 있는 이 중요한 질문을 어떻게 받을 것이냐, 그와 관련해서 두 가지의 어려움이 있는 것 같습니다. 하나는 이렇게 새로운 인간, 새로운 세계를 만든다고 하면 그 즉시 받게 되는 어떤 반응입니다. 아,